My brother screamed I never served. Then I handed the judge one file. ***, the courtroom was dead silent when my brother opened his mouth. I had been standing there for 47 minutes, listening to David twist every memory we had ever shared into something ugly. He had rehearsed this. I could tell by the way his voice never cracked, never stumbled, never missed a beat. He had practiced turning our entire childhood into a weapon aimed directly at me. My name is Elizabeth Swell. I am 39 years old. I served 14 years in the United States Marine Corps. I have been deployed to 3 combat zones, earned 2 commendation medals, and carried wounded soldiers on my back through gunfire so thick the air tasted like copper. I have never stolen anything in my life. But standing in that courtroom, listening to my brother, you would have thought I was the worst kind of criminal alive. "She never served," David said, his voice loud and confident, directed at Judge Harold Mercer like he was delivering a sermon. "Your Honor, Elizabeth has been lying about her military career for years. Our father believed her. He believed every single word she told him, and she used that trust to manipulate him into signing that house over to her name." I felt the words hit me somewhere deep, somewhere old, our father's house. The white house on Clement Street with the green shutters and the oak tree in the front yard that Dad had planted the year I was born. The house where he had taught me to read, where he had pinned my first report card to the refrigerator, where he had cried the morning I shipped out for the first time in my Marine dress uniform. That house. David wanted that house. He had always wanted it, not because he loved it. Not because of the memories. David wanted it because it was worth $400,000, and he had burned through his inheritance twice already and still owed money to people who did not ask nicely. I had known this moment was coming for 6 months, ever since Dad passed and the will was read aloud. Dad had left the house to me. He had written a separate letter explaining why, a letter David claimed was forged. I said nothing yet. I stood straight. 14 years of military discipline does not leave your spine even when everything else is falling apart. David's attorney, a sharp-faced man named Gerald Potts, stepped forward with a stack of papers. "Your Honor, we have gathered significant evidence suggesting that Elizabeth Swell's military records are fabricated. There are inconsistencies in her discharge papers, gaps in her service timeline, and we have been unable to independently verify several of her claimed deployments." Judge Mercer adjusted his glasses and looked at me over the rims. He was in his 60s, a quiet, deliberate man with a reputation for patience. He had not interrupted David once. He had simply listened. "MS. Swell," Judge Mercer said. "You have legal representation. Would your counsel like to respond?" My attorney, Margaret Hale, stood beside me. She was 62 years old, former JAG Corps, and she had a handshake that could crush walnuts. She looked at me once and I gave her the smallest nod. "Your Honor," Margaret said calmly, "my client would like to respond personally if the court permits." A brief pause, then Judge Mercer nodded. "Proceed, Ms. Swell." I stepped forward. I did not raise my voice. I did not look at David. I looked only at Judge Mercer because he was the only person in that room whose opinion was going to matter when this was over. "Honor," I said, "I won't argue with my brother today. I won't answer his accusations with words, because words are exactly how we ended up in this room." I reached into the leather folder Margaret had placed on our table and I removed a single manila envelope. "Instead," I said, "I would like to submit this to the court." I walked it forward myself. The bailiff took it from my hands and carried it to Judge Mercer. The courtroom was absolutely still. I could hear the fluorescent lights humming above us. Judge Mercer opened the envelope. He read for a long time, much longer than I expected. The silence stretched until it became its own kind of pressure, pressing against every wall in that room. I heard David shift in his seat behind me. I heard Gerald Potts whisper something. I did not turn around. I stood straight, hands behind my back. The way you learn to stand when standing still is its own form of courage. What was inside that envelope was not complicated. It was complete. 14 years of official United States Marine Corps service records, certified and sealed by the Department of Defense. Deployment orders to Fallujah, signed and stamped. Combat action ribbon citations. 2 commendation medal citations, one of which described in precise military language the night I pulled a 19-year-old corporal named Danny Reeves out of a burning vehicle under active fire and carried him 300 meters to a medical station. There was a letter from Major General Thomas Whitfield, my former commanding officer, written on official letterhead, attesting to my character, my service, and the specific details of my deployments that David's attorney had called unverifiable. There was a letter from Danny Reeves himself. He was 31 now, living in Phoenix, working as a paramedic. He had written 4 pages by hand. In the 3rd paragraph, he wrote about the night I saved his life. He wrote that he had named his daughter Elizabeth. And at the very back of the envelope, there was a photograph. My father, Colonel James Swell, retired United States Army, standing beside me at my promotion ceremony. He was in his dress uniform. I was in mine. He was not smiling the way fathers smile at birthdays or graduations. He was smiling the way soldiers smile at each other. The way people smile when they recognize something in another person that they also carry inside themselves. On the back of the photograph in my father's handwriting, she earned everything. Never let anyone tell you otherwise, Lizzie. * Judge Mercer looked up from the envelope. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at David. David had gone pale. Gerald Potts had stopped whispering. Mr. Potts, Judge Mercer said, his voice completely level. Your filing claimed that Ms. Swell's military records were fabricated and that her deployments could not be independently verified. Harold Potts stood slowly. Your Honor, I am holding certified Department of Defense records, Judge Mercer said, cutting through the sentence cleanly. I am holding a letter from a major general. I am holding a first-hand testimony from a combat witness. A pause. I am also now deeply concerned about the nature of the claims your client made to this court under oath. Room tilted. I felt it. The moment when everything shifts and the weight moves from one side to the other, David stood up. Your Honor, I was told, Mr. Swell. Judge Mercer's voice did not rise, but it hardened into something absolute. You will sit down. David sat down. What happened next took 40 minutes. Judge Mercer reviewed every document in that envelope with the focused attention of a man who understood exactly what he was looking at. He asked Margaret 2 procedural questions. He asked Gerald Potts 3 sharp questions that Gerald answered very badly. Then Judge Mercer called for a 15-minute recess. I sat in a small room off the hallway with Margaret and a cup of coffee I did not drink. Margaret said nothing because she understood that sometimes the most useful thing another person can do is simply remain present and quiet. I thought about my father. I thought about the morning he drove me to the recruiter's office when I was 22 years old, already holding my college degree, already certain about what I wanted. He had not tried to talk me out of it. He had simply driven, and when we pulled into the parking lot, he had turned off the engine and sat for a moment and then said, "The Corps will take everything you have and give you back something better. Don't be afraid of that." He had been right. I was not afraid. When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Mercer was already seated. He looked at David once, briefly, and then he looked away. In the matter of the estate of Colonel James Swell, Judge Mercer said, this court finds the will dated March 14th to be valid and legally binding. The property at Clement Street is hereby confirmed as the sole property of Elizabeth Swell, as directed by the deceased. I heard David make a sound behind me, not words, just a sound. Furthermore, Judge Mercer continued, given the nature of the testimony presented today and the apparent fabrication of claims regarding Ms. Swell's military service, this court is referring the matter to the district attorney's office for review of potential perjury charges. He set down the papers. Mr. Swell, he said, addressing David one final time, your sister served this country for 14 years. She carried wounded soldiers through combat. She earned the trust of her father honestly and completely. A pause. You would do well to consider carefully what you have spent your own years earning. He picked up his gavel. The sound of it was the cleanest sound I had heard in years outside the courthouse. The afternoon light was sharp and cold. David walked out before me. He did not look back. I watched him reach his car, watched him stand beside the door for a moment with his hand on the roof, watched him bow his head. I did not feel triumph. I want to be honest about that. There was no satisfaction in watching my brother fold into himself in a parking lot. There was only something quieter than that, something that felt like the end of a long march, that particular exhaustion that is also, underneath everything, a relief. Margaret walked beside me down the courthouse steps. You could have said any of that yourself, she said. In the courtroom, you could have spoken for 20 minutes and made the same case. I know, I said. Why didn't you? I thought about it for a moment. The oak tree in the front yard of the house on Clement Street, my father's handwriting on the back of the photograph, Danny Reeves, who named his daughter Elizabeth, because the file already knew how to speak. I said. I just had to make sure it was heard. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded once, the way soldiers nod, not at a sentiment, but at a truth they recognized 3 weeks later. I drove to the house on Clement Street for the first time since Dad passed. I sat in the car for a long time before I went inside. The oak tree was bigger than I remembered. The green shutters needed paint. The front porch had a loose board third from the left, the same board that had been loose since I was 11 years old, and Dad had always said he would fix it and never did. I went inside. It smelled like him still. Old books and coffee and something wooden and warm that I could not name and could not describe to anyone and did not need to. I walked through every room slowly. In his study on the desk, there was a framed photograph I had not seen before. Me, in my dress uniform, at my second deployment send-off. I was 26 years old in the picture. I was looking directly at the camera with an expression that I recognized now as the particular calm of someone who has already made peace with what they are about to walk into. My father had framed it and put it on his desk, had kept it there, I realized, for 13 years. I sat down in his chair. I did not cry immediately. I sat for a long time in the quiet of the house, in the particular silence of a place that has held a whole life inside its walls and is now holding the memory of that life with the same steady care. Then I cried. Not because I had won. Not because David had lost. Not because of courtrooms or files or judges or any of it. I cried because my father had known me, had seen me completely and correctly, and had never, not once, doubted what I was. And I had carried that, the way you carry the things that make you strong, all the way through. Asterisk outside, the oak tree moved in the wind. Asterisk, the house held. Asterisk, some things do.